Alright, we're almost at the end goal of our game. So the final thing that we still need to add is a HUD. So let's go over how we can do that in Unreal. So let's head back to the project. And in our blueprints folder, we are going to add a HUD. So what I'll do here is I'll right click and again add a new blueprint. I'm going to use a user interface and we're going to create a widget blueprint and give this the name BPW game HUDs. So BPW game HUD like this. Now double click on this game HUD. Let's maximize this and you'll notice that we have two elements here. We have a designer and we have a graph, right? So in our designer, we will basically define the different elements that we want to have, and then in our graph, we will, hook everything up the way we want it. So something that might be interesting here is you can select your screen size, for monitors, that kind of stuff, televisions, full screen, custom, and so forth. So say that I want to have set up a 1080 setup. Let's set it to that. So that way we can have a canvas that we can actually use to kind of test everything. Now you can swap these as you go, kind of to test all the different things and see if your HUD still works for those resolutions. So that is actually rather nice. So the first thing that we'll do is start, setting up some layout. So we have our common elements here that we want to use, but actually want to create a panel first. So let's go to the panel option, and let's add a horizontal box. Just drag and drop it in there. All right. Then next up, I'll go to the common tab and I will add some text and I'll drag it into that box. And then I'll also drag a progress bar into that box, like so. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right. And let's make some changes here. So we can see over here are different options. I'm going to select my horizontal box and scale it up. And then I'm also going to take my progress bar and make sure it sets to the right, and you can shift it left and right with the arrows. I'm gonna make sure it's set to the right, and with my horizontal, my progress bar selected, I'm gonna set it to fill. Right, I want it to fill the rest of my little horizontal box. And then you should have something like this. I'm gonna select my text box and change the text to health. So this is gonna be health. So if I want to, I can now position it. So I'm going to select my horizontal box and position it roughly where I want it to be. So somewhere around here. I'll nicely snap it. And if I select my health, I can change my percentage value over here. So I can see how the bar fills. And in my case, I actually want to change the color somewhat. So I'm going to change it to something green. Like so. Excellent. Actually, it might be nice if it's more, poison green, something like that. All right. Good. So next up, let's create another horizontal box and drag it over here. Make sure that it's not parented to the other one, right? So have it nicely standalone, and then let's change the scale a little bit and the size a little bit, and again add two text blocks in there. So and put them next to each other. Then select the first one, and let's change the text. Let's change it to score, like so. And then the second text block, let's set it to a bunch of zeros. It's kind of to know our padding, and also I'm also going to change the color and set it to something blue. All right, we're not going to win UI design awards with this, of course, but you should get the idea. There we go. Now, I'm also going to select my horizontal box for the score, and I'm going to make sure that I change a setting here. I'm going to go to my anchors, click on the anchors, because you can see my anchors are set to the left, and I actually want them to be anchored to the right. So I'm going to select the right anchor, like so. So that way, when our screen changes, it will be nicely, attached to those corners. Good. Let's hit compile and save, and we'll come back to here later to set up the logic. We'll first make sure that we can actually visualize our HUD. So before moving on, let's go to our BP player character, and let's navigate to our begin play. So over here, our begin play, and let's actually move this up somewhat. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a widget, like so, and I'm going to create our BPW game HUD widget. I'm going to leave the owning player empty. That's basically to tell who owns the widget. Because we're making a single player game with, it's only going to be the player HUD. I don't really need this specifically. But you could create HUD elements that are in world that are tied to enemies, for example. And then you can directly link, or other players, right? But you then directly link the owners of that HUD element to it. All right. So with this, we created our game HUD. And you of course have to call this function. So over here, I'll drag and add a sequence like so. So that way we'll have our default initialization. And once everything is done, then we're going to initialize our HUD like so, right? So let's move this all to the bottom a little bit. Excellent. So now that we have created our widget, we won't see it yet, right? We need to make sure that we present it to the player. So what we'll do, we'll take the return value and add it to the viewport. So add to viewport. That will make sure that our HUD is displayed. And then what I'll also do, add a comment here, set up the HUD. All right, so let's hit compile, let's hit save, now hit play. There we go, we can see our HUD. It's on screen, perhaps a bit small, but that's okay. It's not going to do much, right? But it's here. All right, cool. So now we need to link our HUD to the behavior. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll actually start hooking our health. So let's head back over here and actually let's scale this up somewhat, right? I want it to be a little bit bigger, something like that. And let's take the other one as well, also scale it up a little bit bigger. And for my health text, let's see if I can also, no, not set it to fill. Let's center it out, horizontal alignment, set it up like that so it's nicely aligned in the center. So my health bar will be bigger. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to make sure that's nicely aligned. So, like so. Excellent. Good. So, I'm going to select the progress bar that we added for the health visualization. And I'm going to look for the percent value, which I have here on the side. I already messed around with it to kind of visualize what's going on. And I'm going to create a binding. So I'm going to click on this and create binding. And this will create a new function, basically, right? It's going to create a variable, progress bar, and a get percent function. Now I'm going to rename the function. This is actually a getter function. I'm going to rename the function to something else. I can do this here. I can also do it over here. I'm going to rename it to health bar HP. Like so. All right. So because the HUD will always be attached to a controller, we have access to the controller functions in the Unreal functionality stuff. and the gameplay architecture, but you know, I'm just gonna get the player character as is. So I'm gonna do get player character index 0. Then I'm gonna cast it to our player base character actually. Yep, because base character already has health. And then if that is true, I'm gonna get our BPC health component once again and get our health percentage. Get health percentage like so. Hook everything up. There we go. Now, if I go back to my player character real quick, you can see owning player. So technically, if I right click here, I could get owning player. So I could get the owning player pawn and kind of do it like that, right? But like I mentioned, I'm not going to do it specifically here. I'm just going to get the overall player character, right? But if you were to have multiple players, then you would kind of do it like that. Just be aware of this, right? But because we only have one player, I'm going to use this way, this methodology instead. So if I now hit compile and hit save, and let's play the game. So notice that our health bar is now fully filled in, and as I take damage, there we go, it's reducing and I died. So our health bar is already working. Hey, excellent. So next up, let's add some score, right? So just as with the health bar, we're going to do something similar. I'm going to go into my widgets. Where is it? Over here. I'm going to go to my designer, select my score, and for the text, I'm going to create a binding. So bind, I could bind it to the same getter, but I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to rename this to score, like this. And at this point, we don't have a score yet, right? So a good place to kind of keep track of our score would be in our game mode. So let's go to our game mode. And let's add something for that. Let's add a score variable. Let's set it to integer, right? And then also create a score category. Like so, let's make it public. And I'm also going to create a new event here. I'm going to create a new increment score. Oh, hold on. I'm going to add custom event. I'm going to call this increment score. So, and then I'm going to get my score. I'm going to add an integer to it. And actually, I'm going to take my increment score. I'm going to add input as well, because I want to have a variable score. So, because certain enemies might have more score than others. So I'm going to add an integer parameter. I'm going to call it score amount. Default value of 100 points. Let's do it like that. So I'm going to take my score amount and add it to my score. And then, of course, don't forget to set your score. So we're going to save our score. Like so. So now each time that we increment our score, you know, it's going to increase. Now, something that I want to mention here as well. This would ideally be saved in your game state, right? Remember the gameplay architecture? I'm not going to do it right now because it's a bit overkill. But technically, if you were to 100% use the gameplay architecture, you would save this in the game state instead of doing it in the game mode. So the game mode will be the relay, and that would then fill it in the game state, right? So keep that in mind. But for our purposes, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it in the game mode. It's already in a nicely centralized location where it makes sense. That's already, important as well. All right. Now we need to increase the score every time an enemy dies. So let's hit compile, let's hit save. So let's head over to our enemy character. So let's open up our BP enemy character. And whenever a character dies, over here, let's have a look. So on that, we're going to increment our score and then do all the other stuff. So let's select all of this, move it down a little bit. Again, let's add a sequence. Hold down Control to move the sequence order. And what we'll do is I'm going to get my game mode, like so. And then I'm going to cast this to my game mode. So cast to BP my game mode. And if this is true, I'm going to increment score. And as you can see, the default value was filled in. But I'm going to promote this to a variable, obviously. So promote the variable. And let's call this score amount. Make it public. And I'm going to put it on my enemy settings. Hit compile, hit save. There we go. So if we now go back to our widget or BPW Game HUD widget, we can get our game mode as well. So get game mode. And let's cast this to our BP game mode. So, and if it's the case, let's get our score. Get score. And let's hook it all up. Now this should have an auto converter, so let's try it. There we go. It's going to convert this to a text. Hit compile, hit save. Make sure that our character is also saved. Hit compile, hit save. And there we go. So score is 0. If you start shooting at dudes, score 100, 200, 300, and so forth and so forth. Of course, we're not resetting the score or anything, just leaving it. If you want, you can, add stuff to it. You can reset it. Do whatever you like with it. And there we go. All right. Also notice how that whole widget is being added by our character. So if I have a look in my player character, on event begin play, right, we are adding the HUD widget and creating the HUD widget. Notice that that kind of remains on screen, right? Because it already exists, it just remains on the screen. Okay. All right. So next up, I'll show you how to package the project.